Okay.
Welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All, a series of ruminations we do once a week, kind of basically based on our preoccupations and our ruminations regarding our work as, I guess, researchers, artists, architects, writers, speculists, whatever it is we do. But this is episode 57, drawing as generator process, how it generates from its own activities. So anyway, we've been going through a series of ruminations. Recently, we've been talking about organic design thinking, the idea of an organic architecture, and we came across something a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the idea that the institutions are kind of become a little bit either oppressive, unimaginative, unchallenging, and as a result, we have a situation where there's salvation through technique. Anyway, I think I'd mentioned Julie had brought me this beautiful book,
For Christmas.
for Christmas, yes, Merry Christmas,
Merry
which
Christmas.
I have a copy of. I've been looking desperately for years in our laboratory or our library, and unfortunately, I was unable to find it. But
Yes, I know.
fortunately, Julie got it for me in the nick of time, and I find that something that Ortega wrote at the very beginning of this pertains specifically to what we're going to talk about this evening.
Big.
Anyway, so Ortega started out on what he called a series of meditations, which were basically a series of ruminations about elements related to Spain. And he basically started the piece with what he called the reader. And this was supposed to be a way to adjust one's sight to how, in fact, these pieces should be understood. One of the things he says early on, says it within the first couple of paragraphs, and I think the reader is kind of like the vocative is something that is useful in terms of introducing a new form. And I think since the art science complex and organic design thinking is a new form, it deserves kind of like at least a kind of similar kind of introduction. Anyway, Ortega says, I do not claim this activity should be recognized as the most important in the world. I consider myself justified when I observe that it is the only one to which I am capable. Unlike Julie, I have to say, and my work is really the only thing that I am capable. Julie could be anything, but I think in this case, I mean, I basically would say I agree with that. The devotion which moves me to it is the keenest one that I find in my heart. Reviving the fine name which Spinoza used, I will call it amor intellectualis. These are therefore essays in intellectual love. They have no informative value whatsoever. They are not summaries either. They are rather what a humanist of the 17th century would have called salvation. What is sought in them is the following. Given a fact, a man, a book, a picture, a landscape, an error, a sorrow, to carry it to the shortest routes to its fullest significance. We want to place the objects of all kinds which life in its perpetual surge throws at our feet like the useless remains of a shipwreck. In such a position that the sun, as it strikes them, may give off innumerable reflections. Everything has within it an indication of its possible plentitude. An open and noble soul will feel the ambition to perfect it, to keep it, to help it, so that it may reach this plentitude. This is love, the love for the perfection of the beloved object. So we've talked about affection being a necessary kind of preoccupation in organic design thinking, in the fact that there has to be a certain attraction to the particular road that needs to be developed. Whitehead talks about this in terms of character. He talks about the fact that an affection, or kind of like a pre understanding of any particular approach, has to come from some kind of I guess necessity. He doesn't use the word love, but some kind of thing that makes it worthy of our attention. So in terms of what a salvation is, the theme of connection begins here. Salvation seeks the fullness of meaning, which is obtained by putting the theme in direct relation with the elementary currents of the spirit, with the classic subjects of human preoccupation. Once it becomes interwoven with them, it is transfigured. Again, something that we talk about in the metaphorical operation, the idea of transfiguration, the unforeseeable as a result of the metaphorical operation. Transubstantiated, saved. Love, connection, reason are the three converging elements in the constitution of philosophy. The idea of vital reason appears not long afterwards as the fitting expression of the intuition which is introduced in this context. On salvation, see the prologue of the book, and he talks about the particular details. But what Ortega is doing is he's laying out the way in which these etudes, these meditations, are to take place. So, with that said, as a kind of preamble, let's talk about the most important thing, and the only thing that anyone really kind of shows up to see is what's new in This Week in Julie.
Thank you. We just finished a tea's tea.
Tea's tea.
My favorite flavor of jasmine.
Oh, you like jasmine more than rose? I mean, you know, I'm rose. I'm a rose.
I'm first jasmine, then I'm mint green, and then I'm rose.
Really?
It's very hard to find mint.
I would say I like mint, but I mean, I feel that mint is a seasonal one. I love mint in the summertime or the late spring when it starts to get, kind of a little bit overbearing and you need something refreshing. But I feel that rose, the fragrance and the kind of like the character of it is something that I just absolutely adore. In fact, recently, I'd say a couple of months ago, what was interesting was there was a brew that I guess they had gotten that was incredibly bitter.
It was.
And
really
it lasted, I guess, a couple of months, but now it's kind of gone. It's gone, and it seems to have gone back to there. Anyway, the most important part of the program.
Yes, that's good.
This Week in Julie. What's new in Julie?
Well, a lot. Can you hold it? So this is the drawing I started yesterday at the Met. There's a lot of graphite and metallic pencils. The metallic pencils I use are British, actually, the Derwent brand from London. Very few pencils are true metallic. Anyway, this is a discovery. This is my visualization of a discovery that I found absolutely jaw-droppingly fascinating. And this has everything to do with sight and the eye. And this goes right back to the human eye too, although this is about the compound eye. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a compound eye is made of many sight units called ommatidia. And the ommatidia form a very large single eye. In fact, this is the Drosophila melanogaster, meaning the common housefly. This is a fly eye, and this is a scanning electron micrograph, this large oval with the hairs and the bristles that are sticking out, which I have not yet drawn, which has over 750 individual units. Now, here's what...
As do I.
As does Bruce. In fact, I often look at Bruce and I just see a compound eye with legs. Yes. Anyway, the compound eye has remarkable abilities in terms of sight. Very importantly, it is made up of perfect hexagons. Yes, perfect hexagons that fit like a jigsaw puzzle. Each one spaced precisely on all 6 sides next to its neighbor. And here's the fascinating thing. On the convex surface, on the curvature, all the ommatidia are not of an equal size to each other. So they are self-similar in shape, but not in scale. So there are some smaller cells and some larger hexagons, but they all need to fit perfectly. And if the curvature is off, the eye will not function well. So they had no idea what was ultimately the master or mistress sculptor of the compound eye. And now they know, if everyone's on the edge of their seats, calcium waves. So calcium waves, see if you can zoom in super, super, super close. So calcium waves form the ommatidia. Now, I used a diagram, and this ties right in to what we are discussing tonight. This is a diagram showing the motion, the circulation, the entrances, and the exits along the surface of the compound eye of these spontaneous calcium waves. It's a dynamic process, a kinetic one, and I've taken what was in this research article just published in Science, the scientific journal of note, that and Nature, but even more than Nature is Science, where every new discovery is published. And they have very, nice, very clear, but very flat, very rudimentary. It looks like something you might see made of color forms, um, diagrams to illustrate these principles. I have animated it and I have turned a diagram, something completely inorganic, into a living, breathing entity. So I have, in fact, hybridized all of the diagrams. This being another one of the diagrams. See if you can go super close and lift it up if you wouldn't mind. Oh, perfect. This is a diagram that actually shows a false lens and the primary lens, and then the stalks. And I can hold up the diagram if you are curious, and you will see the transformations that I have made to actually turn it into something that is morphic, because it does. It changes all the time and is in fact alive. So I have in fact animated the diagrams. Would you like to add? Because you actually had a really good way to.
Well, what I was saying is,
Yeah.
there are times that things are kind of shown diagrammatically, but I think so much of what we see when people kind of illustrate scientific ideas is just basically drawing an insipid kind of diagram. What they don't do is animate and show any kind of allegorical capacity. I think one of the things, I've been saying this recently because it kind of just comes to light, I think it's a good way to explain what Julie does, is in the history of art, there have been epic tales that have been illustrated. The Greek myths, the Roman myths, the Bible, many of these stories that have become the stories of the Romans, the stories of the Greeks, have become the legends which were depicted throughout history. So what happens is we still see these epic struggles among humans, but some of those epic struggles, especially the ones that have kind of come to cement the significance of the Western world, has been in the realm of science. Now, these stories or these allegories are very much the kind of thing of legend, similar to the story of Job, the fall of Carthage, and meaningful events like this. So what Julie does is basically kind of understand the allegorical capacity of what is an incredibly kind of like, somewhat plastic or kind of artificial way in which they're explained. We spoke last week, and I think maybe this will tie into the reason that it was important to understand the illustration of Maeterlinck, is that scientists write a certain way because of the idiom that's been created based on the business of science writing. It's not writing. And given the kind of intricacy of science and art, since there's no such thing as science and art, there simply is investigations in natural science and natural philosophy. So as a result, Julie draws these allegories in the same way in which Rembrandt or any great painter kind of sees these things as the necessary components from which people can understand beauty, truth, and love. So that may sound crazy when one's talking about microbes or amoebas, but the point is, these are entities, these are circumstances, these revelations about how we are. And, Julie was just telling me recently about a scientific article where we believe that aside from Neanderthals and humanoids, there is another early life form, early human life form
Yes.
that we're now finding out could have existed, which we don't know of yet, which is yet to be named.
But they did something pretty horrific,
Mm.
and it would be interesting to find out who they are.
Right. But to me, what was exciting is the fact that
yeah.
like we've always believed that like humans came, in this kind of like direct lineage and that like Neanderthals were killed off. But
Sure.
now the idea is there might have been this other group,
Should I say
which
what
was
they did
which is
is-
possibly unknown, that we just came. The point
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that this
yeah,
unknown group
yeah.
that like we
Mhm.
think we know everything about
Right,
history,
yeah.
but there could have been this other group that is neither Neanderthal nor human that basically existed, that we're now finding could have existed.
It's basically like the third fungal partner in a lichen.
Possibly, yeah.
No, that's a really very direct analogy.
It's possible, yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
the thing is, we had believed that there was
Mhm.
no need to have this other component, but now we
Yeah.
realize this other component existed. And
Oh,
you were going
yeah.
to say about what the heinous, kind of
Well, I don't have
reason
to, but
behind. No,
yeah.
I think it's important,
Yeah, I
as to
think-
why they came about or
Well,
why they were
how they
recognized.
found out about them.
Mhm.
I don't think they ever would have found out about them had it not been for what they did. And what they did is pretty horrific. I'll take a sip of. Now we're on to Tea's Tea Rose, which I
Yeah.
do like. Thank you. They massacred pretty much all of the farmers in the communities, which were very peaceful people. I mean, these were literally farmers. It's like coming along and massacring all of the homesteaders or stained glass craftspeople. I mean, these were farming villages and farming towns where they were basically, raising livestock and farming fruits and grains and vegetables. And they found mass graves, I mean, with hundreds and hundreds of people separated by miles and miles, meaning whoever this third party was, they traveled.
Mhm.
And they had a plan. It wasn't that they just did this occasionally.
Mhm.
They wiped out the farmers because nobody really knew why people stopped farming, because they were murdered is actually why. And they cut off all their heads. Every single body in these mass graves had its head chopped off, including the children. It's really gruesome, including their pets, including the animal. I mean, so I don't know who they are yet. And I'm not sure that they know who they are yet,
Mhm.
but it's quite something. And they did this very brutally, quickly, and methodically.
Mhm.
And we don't even know why, because the farmers weren't armed
Right.
and the farmers weren't a threat. And here is the shocker.
Mm.
They didn't steal the farmers' land. So why did they do it? They also didn't steal their crops. They didn't take their livestock. They didn't move into their houses like the bears in Japan.
Well, here's the theory.
Very,
All right,
very
here's the theory,
interesting.
right? So you have someone who wipes out a way of life,
Yeah,
right?
an entire way
Right.
of life.
So the thing is, the farmers basically were settling the land
Sure.
rather than basically kind of like hunting on the land.
They were not hunting, yeah.
No, exactly. But they were kind of basically kind of making a point where they were saying, this is where we are. We're going to till this land and basically make it fertile
And stay and
stay
settle
here.
down.
Right.
which
So
is
we were
what they
settling.
did.
They were settling.
They
the
were
land.
settlers, yeah.
So it could just be that that this group saw that the idea of settling land was a threat to their existence.
Yes,
Because the thing
certainly.
is, they could have been more nomadic. They could have been hunters in certain ways, or they had some kind of way of life. They had some way of
wouldn't the
life.
nomads have just moved on? I mean, there was a lot of land.
I'm just I'm just speculating. What I'm
It's
saying is
true.
the idea of someone settling the land was so
Mhm.
much of a threat to them
Oh, true.
that
yeah.
they had to murder them in entirety, because
Yeah,
they couldn't tolerate the idea of the land being settled.
that's an
Because for
interesting
them,
idea.
the land was not. That's just off the top of
Well,
my head.
it's an
again.
interesting thought.
It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Anyway, yeah.
with that said,
Mhm.
basically what we've been talking about recently is the idea.
That was very comforting, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very comforting.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think the reality
Mhm.
is that what we're talking about is the fact that, technique and the ability to kind of generate are things that we've seen in the past that have come to bear fruit.
Mhm.
So I think that one of the laments that I hear continually of young artists, more young artists for the most part, but I mean, I myself have been feeling this lamentation for wow, like 40 years. I used to initially just think it was just, a kind of retrograde fetish within the architectural community, but I do believe it's actually something maybe more kind of structural. But the reality is, I've come
Mhm.
to understand the fact that at times when there's a kind of like lack of inspiration in terms of the kind of problems and institutions that are presented, the artists basically kind of take control and kind of like find that way to generate from themselves. I always use the example of the artists at the late 19th, early 20th century who felt that the particular idiom that was kind of like the case needed to be overcome. And that people who left the academy, sorry, you okay?
I'm getting a
You need a
Ricola.
Ricola?
Yes, I'll be right back.
Individuals who left the
Would
academy. I
you
mean,
like
this
one?
also happened in music where people felt as if like, the common idioms and the common, organizational capacities that were presented were not really fulfilling to the curiosities and imaginations of the artists themselves. I feel we're at a similar point. I feel as if a lot of the things that we have looked upon in many different vocations have kind of run aground. And as a result, I mean, I have felt that there certainly wasn't anything as a young architect that I felt was a challenge within the institutions that were presented to me. They seemed kind of somewhat insipid, kind of, and kind of like let's I would, fetish was a word I used a lot, but I mean, I kind of feel as if like there was just a lot of things that I had absolutely no interest in pursuing. And I just found that they just really weren't of they weren't worthy of my imagination. So anyway, what I felt was, okay, what is? Now I think, one of the things I remember reading, and this was when I was a student, was reading, um, the work of Ortega and understanding the fact of the generations, and that with each generation comes a certain circumstance by which this generation basically fulfills or does not fulfill its destiny. And as a result, I started to think about the fact that certain things exist in certain times, certain ideas exist in certain times, and those natures of ideas give about a circumstance that kind of creates a potential, as it were. So what I think happens is what are the tools that the artist has to use in his quest, and I think that kind of comes from his the things that he basically does every day. So in my case, as an architect, the two things that I felt were important were drawings and models. Now I love the idea of models, and I just like the term because it's basically a speculation. It's an abstraction. It's not a thing. And it's also something that is an architectural kind of like idiom. A lot of people associate buildings with architects, but in fact, architects don't make buildings, contractors make buildings. But the buildings that contractors make are based on the models that architects make. So the speculations that we have basically become those artifice, and that artifact that we generate as a model, right? Which is a model. And again, this term again goes to the idea that, climate scientists make models, physicists make models, biologists make models. We make models of different things to try to basically try to make some kind of sense of these things. Architects do the same thing. So I felt that that's nature of not a kind of like concrete thing, but this abstract speculation was, again, along with drawing, those things that were the tools that I was to use to kind of move towards, no thanks, towards this idea of emancipating myself in order to kind of engage in those things that would basically fulfill the desires of my generation. So that said, those two things, those two activities that basically were those things from which I would generate were drawings and models. So in that case, I come to see the kind of primacy of drawing within the context of the generation. So, what I think happens is that if one's to kind of put it in simple terms, the idea is to discover an image rather than be kind of dependent on an image. And what I mean by that is we've talked about copying, we've talked about, drawing, we've talked about the difference. I think Julie and I both demonstrate different characteristics in terms of what we do in terms of drawing. So I would say simply that in case of drawing, what happens is you make that situation where your drawing is trying to be, in the case of a copyist, the copyist is trying to make a resemblance, and he's dependent on that thing because that's the way by which you judge the resemblance. It has its own life, but its life is basically vicariously through the thing that is a copy. In my case, when I draw, the idea is I see a certain character. Now, this character is an impression in my mind, right? And this impression in my mind may or may not have been the impression in the mind of the artist, or something that's actually even indeed present in the thing that I'm looking at. But in this case, what I'm doing is trying to capture the character as an etude, as a study.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, capturing that is a way of kind of illustrating that idea of capturing that aspect of human nature. What Julie does, and I'm going to say it and then you can kind of elaborate on it, is the fact that Julie has a series of images from disparate pieces, like the piece that she's just shown you, where she basically has it in her mind that it's going to be conjured. So in the case of the drawing, I think Julie's is the most, I'd say, holistic in terms of an organic sense, in the fact that it comes about as a result of the process of drawing as itself. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Give us a little, and then I'll kind of talk about the premise after that, but give us an idea of that.
Well, I'll use the drawing that you just saw that I'm currently working on now as a primary example of what we are talking about here in this program. Yes, I'd love some tea. I'm really tired. So it is, the way I approach drawing is as a hybridization for many, many purposes. I have several core concepts in my mind. I have almost always a scientific research paper, a new discovery, a recent article that I have read in Science, and I immediately think, how can I visualize this through fine art? How can I visualize this in a drawing? I have the same approach in my metaphorical science paintings, which is how I can communicate some fairly complex information that most people would not even know about or think about, even people in other scientific fields, were it not for the presentation in a very singular and unique fashion. For example, in the drawing I am doing, I'm also using an Indian Mughal inlaid container, gold, brass, and silver on ebony, that is in fact hexagonal, as one of the metaphors for the hexagonal unit of the Drosophila melanogaster fly eye. So that is the piece that is levitating right there, that piece. And I'm also using a jalis, which is also Indian, which goes right down through here as the trellis or the scaffolding or the framework on which these ommatidia are inserted, based, and held fast, much like the cells in a beehive. In fact, I would compare the compound eye, which is found across the boards in insects, as well as a lot of arthropods, as well as crustaceans, and Bruce, of course, to the cells in a beehive or paper wasp. I would say a beehive is more apt because of the way it is made. And I will go right back to our subject at hand, because of the way the bees have drawn it.
Hmm.
And by that, I mean that the bees draw their hive, they create it as they imagine it, as they engineer it, as they build it, as they fill it, as they use it and manipulate it, build it up, and very often abandon it for reasons not of their crafting. But theirs is a drawing in process of a city, in fact. So that is the drawing of the polis of Hymenoptera or bees. That is that's what bees are called. That is the family name of bees. Uh, or the honeybee Mellifera.
Mhm.
So in this case, I have used a Jalis. I have used an Indian inlaid vessel, a hexagonal one, as well as 4 of the diagrams of the key ones from the research article, as well as my additional research on the structure of the compound eye, all explaining this multi-page research article in Science because it's such a very important idea that a mineral is the sculptress, in fact. And it was completely a shock. I mean, they didn't know, and they still don't know what triggers a lot of the calcium waves, and they don't know really how they work. I mean, think of the complexity of what the calcium waves are doing. They are making sure all of these 750 in these case, and in sometimes many thousands of hexagonal units, all have edges that are perfect. So these are perfect hexagons that fit like a jigsaw.
Interesting. I remember from In the Life of the Bee, right?
In the Maeterlinck.
Maeterlinck basically came upon a very simple formulation of an observation he had made, or it had been made, about the hexagonal structure of the beehive. And there was a challenge that was given to, now again, this is 1904, 1905, where he was given a challenge in the fact that certain mathematicians I don't remember the exact thing, but I do remember the conclusion was the fact that the mathematicians of the day could not divine the solution to the degree of perfection that had been obtained by the bees.
Even now, again, given all the time.
Yes, exactly. Now, given the fact that this is 1905, this is the same year that Einstein writes the 5 most important papers in physics and revolutionizes the physical world. So we were pretty capable in 1905 mathematically. Yet, as we saw, the bees were still able to calculate beyond our capability.
Without the tools.
Beyond our capability.
Yeah, without the tools of the mathematicians.
Right. So, as I wanted to say before, I put the crust in crustacean.
You do?
I do. Anyway, so.
Or crusticle.
A crusticle. I like that, a crusticle. So anyway,
it's like a barnacle.
So based on this idea now, the idea is to discover an image rather than be dependent on it. The kind of final abstraction of this idea kind of comes from the fact that the drawing itself becomes a generator. So if we are to emancipate ourselves, I feel that in my case, to emancipate myself from a very kind of like rigid and kind of like unimaginative architectural circumstance, my case is through organic design thinking is to basically use the tools themselves to generate. Now, in the case of the drawing, we are pattern recognition specialists.
I was just going to bring that up.
Oh, good. Puddle. I figured one brain and 2 straws.
2 great straws.
Crazy straws.
And I was going to say that in a few ones.
Of course. So I'll say it. Crazy straws.
Crazy straws.
So the case was
twisty.
Yeah, we are twisty. Yeah. So anyway, so the idea is the drawing itself as a generator comes from the fact that if you separate now from the pieces we've talked about before to the case of its own extreme abstraction, and again, there's no within this range, there's no kind of like true edges. There really is only a question of degree. But in the case of the fact that if one simply draws the line across the page with a brush, with a pen, with a pencil, what happens is certain images start to emerge. A simple example is as I draw a horizontal line across the page, I create a horizon. I separate up and down. I start to create a binary. So just by that, I kind of these simple things. So the idea is as we work, as we draw, we start to generate. And the thing is, what happens is the more we start to generate from the things that we see, we start to mimic that nature that is of the composer who basically sits down and starts to play and make sounds and start to see the correlation between the sounds and start to discover things as they go. So the extreme abstraction would be that which is simply generating imagery and building upon those things as one works from a blank page with a pencil, simply drawing it and following the imaginations that emerge.
Okay. Can I, before I forget?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, come on.
No.
Okay. Okay. So the very act, he's so cute. The very act of drawing for me is that, so nice. He's my love.
Say.
Is not just a generator, it is an engine of understanding. And I will explain. When I draw a texture and a pattern, and I am set about how do I visualize, how do I manifest the complexities, the properties, the visual acuities, the touch, the feel, the smell, and the texture of these patterns, of the textures. I mean, I'm dealing with a dozen different textures in this one drawing. In the painting I'm doing now, which is called Gilded Terrors of a Court Jester, which I have discussed and shown at length in previous episodes, I'm dealing with, in fact, I just painted a gold key. And this was the perfect.
I used that key to unlock my bike.
I know, it's so great, which is so interesting because it's a false key.
It is, but it's also painted.
Yes, it is.
But it still unlocks my bike.
Because I painted it that way.
But it unlocks my chain on my bike.
Very nice. So when you're painting the substance of something, you are gleaning an understanding of something on such an intimate scale. You are understanding this artifact at a cellular level like nothing else. And by that, in terms of this gold key, the way I understood it deepened profoundly because keys were given in the 18th century. Keys started to be given to those who didn't really count for anything in the household. This was a court jester to King Augustus II in Germany. And the jester was given a key that opened no doors, that opened nothing. In fact, it's not even a functional key. It was simply representative of a real key that a century earlier would have opened doors, meaning we are mocking you with a key that doesn't really do anything or have any of the properties. In fact, it's a hollow key without teeth that goes right through to thin air.
Right. But it also becomes a symbol of your office.
It's a symbol of the office, but it's a non-functioning symbol, just like he was called Baron Schmiedel. He was not a baron, and Schmiedel was not his real name. So when I'm drawing a texture and drawing a pattern, the act of creating those lines, those marks, those calligraphic symbols, dots, cartouches, ascenders, dashes, swirls and clouds, all of those are forming a scaffold, an entire narrative of that subject and all connected topics at once.
Right. So I would say in this case, rather than the technique being in the service of an artificial narrative, it's in the service of itself. because it's
Yeah, that's what I
actually
mean.
playing to its own ability to kind of fascinate itself.
Yeah.
Because it emerges, like you said, it becomes self-analytical. It becomes
Yeah.
able to kind of, well, no, I'm not going to say
You
something.
are
Yeah,
analyzing a
right. You're
pattern.
basically, yeah, you're discovering those things that you basically unearth as you move. And I think that sense of the idea of its technique in the service of itself,
Mm-hmm.
right, is the piece that I kind of really want to make sure we understand.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, like, and by itself, meaning it basically tries to discover those things as they emerge and work with them and kind of move in a direction that basically comes from the drawing from the technique itself.
Yes.
I think you've kind of just kind of
Thank
said
you.
that.
And
Yeah.
something very marvelous happens.
Say.
In the creation of a drawing of a pattern or texture, your mind, if it is an adventurous, agile, imaginative mind, will make new connections where there had not been any
Mhm.
and this is a beautiful and key thought, to all of those hidden, clandestine, and cloaked places where you have seen or imagined you have seen or will see those textures or patterns.
Mm.
A quick example: if you
Whoosh.
see, yes, if you see a jalis pattern, meaning a cutout pattern, your mind will find this pattern in places that you never imagined. You will find it on the back of an Indian temple dancer. You will find it on a pillowcase with a floral. You will find an open floral lattice network everywhere. You will find it in the fur of a rabbit. You will start to see it, not where it isn't, but where it always was, and you had not yet discovered it. That's what I wanted to say.
Would you potentially find an elephant in your pajamas?
Yeah. And what's that elephant doing in my pajamas? Said Groucho
Yeah,
Marx.
and I think
The
this kind of
funniest person ever.
reminds me a little bit of what Whitehead was talking about when he
Mhm.
talked about the censure of genius and the inductive method. I think the idea that one kind of like this that divines principles from a series of observations.
Mhm.
The idea is not that this is all that 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 can be divined. It's simply that this is the most consequential, right? And that's what gives it value. And I think that's something to understand, is that what makes the speculation or the abstraction valuable is the consequence that it brings to us.
Mhm.
And we may think that we fulfilled the totality, but in fact we have done nothing of such. We have basically just distilled a consequence, right? But there are other consequence, and maybe that we have yet to be discovered in any circumstance in this regard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yes, I agree. What it does too for the truly adventurous mind is, thank you, is it frees you up to invent further. And by that I mean, for example, in my drawing we just showed the Indian Mughal vessel with its beautiful and intricate micro inlay of florals, flowers, and vines and abstract shapes. You will start to look at your own anatomy. I immediately looked to my fingernails and noticed how they are inlaid into the flesh of my digits. I immediately saw the space around my eyes, through my eyes, and through yours,
Hmm.
as they are inlaid in the sockets in our skulls. I studied the floor at the Met and saw all those cracks where they had various leaks, and imagined all the tidal pools and ponds that had formed little micro universes in the inlay of the floor in all of these compromised edges. It makes things fascinating, things that your brain will connect as you draw these. I believe and this is based on things I've read, on research, and what I believe to be absolutely true neuroscientifically about how the brain really does process information. If you feed your brain something entirely novel, and there's nothing more novel than creating a new image, line, shaded object, pattern, texture, shadow, or highlight in your original drawing with graphite on a blank sheet of Strathmore, that's what we use, paper, you are crafting a novel concept. Your brain is very hungry for these, and it will take that, if it is truly adventurous, and run with it almost like a gleeful child in a meadow of wildflowers. I believe this is food for the starving brain.
That's the, yeah, but
Yeah.
that's the statement that Maeterlinck calls out in Portrait of a Lady. He basically kind of calls to that same kind of like playful innocence, that sense of adventure. And I think that's the kind of that's always the call that the real artist will kind of be, or the real scientist, what the speculist will answer that call. And I think genius will always answer that call. Genius will always lay at the end of that pursuit. And that's basically what we're saying, is that this is like a clarion call to basically say, and I see this more and more in people who have kind of felt a dissatisfaction. A friend of ours, I think I don't know if I told the story, but a friend of ours talked about his mother, who's a great pianist, right? No, pianist or violinist? I don't remember. Anyway,
one of his parents classical is a pianist, one's a violinist.
And as a result, took about 20 years before she was able to really fulfill herself in terms of her own kind of like improvisation,
her own composition,
right? Yeah, but I mean, she felt that she'd been told not to, because she's a performer, not a composer. So therefore, it wasn't her place. But it took her 20 years to realize, hey, I'm dissatisfied. I know about this instrument. I basically need to do this. And we're seeing more and more people kind of become frustrated with the opportunities that are being presented to them as the institutions have become sallow and flaccid
and stayed.
Exactly. But again, I don't think it's ever the place of the institution to kind of like decide the direction of the work. The direction of the work should come from the artists themselves.
But if they're dampening it, if they're stamping it down, that's what they're doing.
Right. And I mean, again, there is a necessity for technique. I'm never going to dismiss technique. Again, I have this, I mean, again, for me, there's no more clear example of a kind of like a stark technical brilliance than is Leonardo. And I don't think it's overly wrought. I think the greatness of Leonardo is the fact that it's very, very clear and very obvious. And it leaves in the hands of the individual the ability to be successful or not. And I think he very much illustrates the fact that you don't need a lot to be incredibly kind of like brilliant. I mean, Leonardo's genius is quite clear in terms of the way in which he puts it down. So I see people who will obsess about technique and I'm like, that's the part where I just kind of think, hey man, just draw.
Well, that's
and I think that we, when we do start to make merchandise, I think one of the things that we should have is a T-shirt that says, just draw.
I agree. A quick word on the copyist. This experience doesn't come to the copyist, and certainly not a plagiarist. This experience comes to a creator who's creating original works. You certainly can, as I am, inspired by many things, but how you present them, how you manifest them is what I'm talking about. If you manifest them in a truly original way, if you are drawing something that is wholly yours, that is not a copy of someone else's, it's not plagiarized, that is not simply a tracery ghost of something, your brain isn't going to take a copy and run with it, because it's not something that you are generating.
No.
And to copy what someone else has generated isn't going to do what we are talking about.
Right. And the other thing is in relationship to plagiarism, I think that is that what we're talking about next. I mean, I think that's next week. It's like, let's
Not
see.
sure.
Okay, let me see. So we're on drawing is generate. Yeah, copying and plagiarism.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then
It's a
actually the
great
one after
segue,
that is the beauty and necessity of original ideas. So they're
No,
good. So
yes.
we're playing.
This is a
All right,
great segue.
This is falling out perfectly.
Sure.
So I think the reality is a real artist would not be able to kind of look himself in the mirror, would not be able to hold his head with any kind of like reality if he was to basically not work from his own originality.
A real artist.
A real art.
Yeah.
And I
Very
think,
few of us.
you know, anyone who steals, anyone who plagiarizes is just, to me, they're just the most pathetic thing. They're below maggots.
It's the lowest form.
They really are. I mean, honestly.
And they are the great pretenders and the great frauds.
And I think the thing is, the
actually.
great thing about being an artist, architect, biologist is the ability to kind of have that sense of satisfaction of your own achievement. But to basically steal someone else's achievement as yours is just so pathetic.
It's low.
It's the kind of thing that you can't help but pity someone that pathetic,
because you
can't even hate them. You have to pity them because they're just so sad.
They will never glean anything from it. That's what I'd like to say. They will never glean or harvest or love any of the benefits to their mind, if they had an imagination, they wouldn't be plagiarizing other people's work. But all of these are the intellectual dividends of original thought.
True.
That's what I'm saying here.
Right.
And they are multitudinous.
Right. And in fact, Mr. Spock, our dear friend,
yes, Mr.
knows
Spock.
this circumstance quite well.
Oh, he does.
From his own personal experience, which we'll not go into. But I mean,
we will ask him if we can in the future.
But again, the point is, I mean, he knows all too well this circumstance. But anyway, so the idea is the technique in the service of itself in order to generate work. So drawing in itself, the generator. In a couple of weeks, we'll talk about models, and we'll also talk about the symbiotic relationships between drawings and models, which goes at the heart of organic design thinking. The reason why we repeat these things or kind of parts in relation to the parts is I find this comes in a circuitous way, that you kind of go back over certain territory and certain things kind of emerge that maybe weren't clear in a different iteration that maybe came previous. So I find that like going back over these things, ruminating on these things is kind of not only good to me because it allows me to kind of clarify things that maybe weren't clear before, given the time that elapsed from before and now. And again, you have to go back and say, hey, wait, that's stupid. This happens to me. It doesn't happen to Julie. So
of course not.
No, of course not. But so I do kind of find the value in kind of going back over these things and kind of seeing this. But I think technique in the service of itself, not in the service of an artificial kind of narrative. And I think I feel hopeful that given the kind of somewhat pathetic circumstance that the world finds culturally itself embraced in, that what can possibly save us is what saves us all the time, is that a group of people who are dissatisfied and uninterested in the kind of like specious, ridiculous antics and gibberish, go off on their own and then find each other. I was speaking with a new friend last week, actually, about the fact that, they're out there. And, but what's good about it is lions always like to have their own terrain. They always like to have their own mountain.
Yeah, I have a few key things.
Say. All right.
I'd love to bring up classical music before we have to sign off, because it is highly relevant to our discussion of drawing as a self-generator that's for you. Especially where patterns and textures, and I'm talking about oral textures too, AURAL, very, very important. A composer is drawing with sound, and I cannot state that with more clarity. In the same way, and I'll bring up two particular composers and two particular compositions, two of my favorites. Schoenberg's Transfigured Night.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let me just focus here.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you know the tale, and I want to encourage you all to go find out the tale, it completely transforms what is essentially an intense fairy tale. It elevates it. It becomes epically tragic and transcendent. And it is the transfiguration we are talking about. The sheer numbers, the climbing of the depths, the creation of textures, of forms, of shadows. It is an incredibly complex composition. I not only see the characters, I see years and years ahead. I see Grimm's fairy tales. I see opera stories. I see epic characters of the past. I see Gilgamesh in the Shadows, Joan of Arc. It is an incredibly transcendent, mythic piece of music. And I cannot say enough about the sheer virtuosity of Schoenberg's oral calligraphy. His pencil line is surely that of a virtuoso, and it is drawn. It is as much a drawing as somebody drawing on a paper. The other one is the Florida Suite, which is a Delius piece. You have a curious expression.
No, I'm listening.
Okay. For those of you who don't know, Frederick Delius was a phenomenal British composer who died horribly of syphilis, which is an absolutely awful way to go. So he lost his mind, went blind. It was just absolutely awful. But he just wrote some of these sweeping, towering compositions. And the Florida Suite was written in exile when he thought he was going to be a farmer in Florida. He was British, had absolutely no understanding of swamps, the Florida climate. It was a disaster. I mean, he was trying to escape his father, who wanted him to be a lawyer, which he didn't. He fled to the new world for a new life, which it wasn't. It was a disaster all the way around, but he did generate the Florida Suite, which is about 37 minutes of the most lush, sweeping, heart jangling, brain stabbing, just mind blowing. It conjures groups of people he'd never met. You'd think he wouldn't understand, but he captured perfectly. And it was as far from his culture as you could get from a Londoner in the southern swamps. But he drew an image of all of these terrains, this way of life, completely different plants, vistas, absolutely everything in a way that no local person ever did before he went mad. But anyway, I'd like to just say this exists in classical music in spades.
Oh yeah, and I think the piano and the I think the piano is the same as the pencil. I mean, I think that the piano basically allows someone to draw. And I think that the idea of I think that as we kind of get people to understand the interconnectedness of these things, and we kind of we'll use the term drawing, and basically someone draws with sound, someone draws with lead, someone draws with color. But the point is, we will understand that aspect of the idea of generating from the piece itself. So the technique in the service of itself. Okay, so next week, we're basically going to be talking about copying and plagiarism. That's episode 58. This is our last episode for the year, so Happy New Year. When we see you on Wednesday, once our preview, we will be before the end of the year, but this is the last full episode. So
it will be later.
The realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to keep it that way.
Precisely.